So when you mentioned that guy at Google, I would love to kind of get into what Google is doing specifically, because I think what a lot of people do is they'll look at specific platforms and they'll say, this is ruining people's minds. This is ruining people's minds. This is the reason that you're addicted to whatever. And I'm like, it's across the board. It's all technology. If you can access it on your phone or your laptop, it is trying to monetize you, and they're all guilty. And I was listening to a couple of podcasts with Google specifically, and I didn't realize at this moment, Google is pretty much the internet. Even if you're using other servers, like it all kind of has to go through Google first.
Yeah. So just before, because I'm so conscious of what you said, and I'm really glad you said it earlier about hope. I just want to give an example about hope that I think will help us to think about Google, because it can sound like, fucking hell, we're trapped in the matrix then, right? And I want to give a very specific example that I think will help us to understand the solution to the problem we're about to talk about. So I think you're probably too young to remember this, Candice, but I can just remember that it used to be normal that people, in fact, the dominant form of gasoline in the US and Britain used to be leaded gasoline, right? So you'd put lead into your car, and then that lead would be pumped out into the air and everyone was breathing in lead, right? Mm-hmm. And a bit before my time, it used to be normal that people painted their homes with leaded paint. Mm-hmm. And then it was discovered lead fucks your brain, and it particularly devastates children's ability to focus and pay attention, right? They actually knew about that going all the way back to the 1920s. There was an amazing scientist called Dr. Alice Hamilton who figured it out. But the lead industry funded a kind of bullshit denial kind of science, pseudoscience, that said, oh, no, lead's fine. It's just that people need to dust their homes a bit more. But by the time you got to the 70s and the early 80s, it was just undeniable that lead was having this terrible effect on people's attention. So a group of moms, it was mostly moms, got together and said, why are we allowing this? Why are we allowing a for-profit company to fuck our children's brains, right? Maybe they didn't swear as much as I did, but that was the gist of what they said, right? So what did they do? It's really important to notice what they didn't do. They didn't say, ban all gasoline. They didn't say, ban all paint, right? Because paint and gasoline are good things. They said, let's ban the specific aspects of the paint and the gasoline that are harming people's attention. Really important to bear in mind for when we get to the internet debate, because we don't want to ban all this stuff. Loads of it is great and good. Mm-hmm. We want to deal with the specific aspects that are damaging our attention. And what happened with those moms? They fought for years. They succeeded. As a result, we're not exposed to lead anything like the same amount. And what's the outcome? According to the Center for Disease Control, because of the reduction in exposure to lead, the average American child is 3 to 5 IQ points higher than they would have been had we not banned lead, right? An amazing piece of progress, a real model for us. Something was identified in the environment that was fucking up our ability to focus. And so we got rid of that thing from the environment, right? It can be done. So let's go to Google, for example. So another one of the heroes in my book is Tristan Harris, who is an extraordinary person. I'm sure you know his work. He's become very famous. I feel glad because I got to know him before he was famous. And I still know him now. He's my friend. So Tristan, if you want to understand what Google's done to our attention, there's many aspects of this, but to give you an example of a story Tristan told me years ago that really haunts me. So Tristan worked on Gmail, which is owned by Google, was developed by and is a Google product. He worked on Gmail really early in the development of Gmail. And they were trying to figure out how to get more people to use Gmail, obviously, but also they particularly wanted to get people to use Gmail more often. I'll come to why in a little while. So they're trying to figure out how can we get people to use it more often. And one day, sitting in the Googleplex, and one of Tristan's colleagues said, I've got an idea. Why don't we make it so that every time someone gets an email, their phone vibrates a little bit? Everyone said, that's a good idea, let's do it. A week later, Tristan was walking around San Francisco, and he just hears this buzzing everywhere, this noise, like a kind of weird dystopian bird song. And suddenly he realizes, shit, we did that. That's us. That's my colleague sitting next to me. We did that.
Wow.
And then he realized, oh, that's happening all over the world, right? He later calculated it. That one decision had led to 10 billion interruptions to people's day every day across the world. 10 billion. Think about what we were talking about before, about how being interrupted damages your attention. Professor Michael Posner discovered that if you're interrupted, it takes you on average 23 minutes to get back to the level of focus you had before you were interrupted.
Mhm.
But loads of us now never get 23 minutes spare, right? So Tristan is like horrified. So he's like, shit. So he starts to try to persuade people inside Google, this is really bad what we're doing, right? We're really, we're not being responsible custodians of people's attention and focus. But and often his colleagues were very sympathetic, not least because all of them were having their attention fucked up as well. There was one moment, Dr. James Williams, who also worked at Google, spoke at a tech conference in front of the people who design the things that we all use every day. And he said to them, if there's anyone here who wants to live in the world that we're creating, put up your hand now. And nobody put up their hand, right? So they don't want to be in the machine that they're building either. But what's really important here is to figure out, okay, how do we solve this? Because Tristan tried to persuade people on the inside, which is totally understandable. He was on the inside. It seems logical. I'm at the heart of the machine. Why not try and persuade the people here? Who better, right, to persuade? But Tristan kept bumping up against something. And to me, this is the heart. Understanding this is the heart of understanding what is the equivalent to the lead in the lead paint, right? What's the thing we need to fix, the primary thing we need to fix to deal with this, which is one of the 12 factors that I write about in Stolen Focus that are harming our attention. And the key thing to understand here is that they didn't listen to Tristan, not because they're evil people. They're not evil people, right? Not because they're like James Bond villains. They're not. The reason they didn't is because of their current business model. And if you understand the current business model, you understand why they're damaging our attention and how we can start to put it right. So anyone listening, if you open Facebook now, if you open TikTok now, if you open any social media app now, that app starts to make money straight away in two ways. First is really obvious. You see ads. Okay, everyone listening knows how that works. The second way is much more important. Everything you do on these apps is scanned and sorted by their artificial intelligence algorithms to figure out who you are, right? So let's say that you click that you like, I don't know, Bette Midler, Donald Trump, and you tell your mom you've just bought diapers. Okay, so the algorithm is going to figure out if you're a man and click that you like Bette Midler, you're probably gay. If you click that you like Donald Trump, you're probably conservative. And if you're talking to someone about buying diapers, you've probably got a baby, right? I mean, I don't know. So there's gay conservative with baby, right? They've figured out. They've got tens of thousands of facts like that about you, right?
Mhm.
And they're building up those facts for two reasons. One is to sell information about you to advertisers, to sell your attention to advertisers, so advertisers can target you, but also to figure out what the weaknesses in your attention are. What are the kind of things that keep you scrolling, right?
Mhm.
So the longer you scroll and the more often you pick up your phone and look at these apps, the more money they make. So every time you pick up your phone and look at these apps, they start to make money. And every time you put them down, that revenue stream disappears, right? So
Mhm.
all of their AI, all of their algorithms, all of this genius in Silicon Valley is geared towards one thing, figuring out how do we get Candice to pick up her phone as often as possible and scroll as long as possible? How do we get Candice's kids to pick up their phone as often as possible and scroll as long as possible? That's it. That's all they
Mhm.
care about. As a corporation, that's all they care about. Just like the head of KFC, doesn't matter if he's a nice guy or an asshole. All he cares about is how much KFC did you eat today. That's it.
Mhm.
That's his job, right? So the whole machinery is built around getting you to, about invading your attention and getting you to scroll as long as possible. Don't take my word for it. Don't take the word of dissidents like James and Tristan. Listen to the people at the heart of Facebook. Sean Parker, one of the biggest initial investors in Facebook, said publicly, we designed Facebook to maximally invade your attention. We knew what we were doing and we did it anyway. God only knows what it's doing to our kids' minds, right? That's what he said. We know from Facebook's own leaked research. They know they're destroying our collective and political attention. They know their own data scientists are telling them that, right?
Mhm.
So obviously, I was thinking a lot about, well, how do we solve this? Because it can feel really overwhelming when you hear that. But Asa Raskin, who is invented a key part of how many websites work, told me, look, if you want to understand the solution, it's really simple. For this part of it, you've got to ban the current business model, right? A business model that is based on figuring out the weaknesses in your attention in order to hack them and sell your attention to the highest bidder, that is just inhuman. It's like the lead in lead paint. Just ban it. And loads of
Mhm.
other people in Silicon Valley said that to me. And it took me a long time to get my head around it. So I was like, well, hang on a minute. Let's imagine we do what you're saying. and the next day I open Facebook, would it just say, sorry, everyone, we've gone fishing? He said, of course not. What would happen is they would have to move to a different business model. And absolutely everyone listening has experience of the two different business models that they could move to. One is subscription. We all know how Netflix and HBO work. You pay a small amount, you get access. Or alternatively, think about the sewers. Before we had sewers, we had shit in the streets. People got cholera. It was a disaster. So we all pay to build and maintain the sewers, and we all own the sewers together, right? Whatever city you're in, you own the sewers along with all the other citizens of that place.
Mm-hmm.
It may be that like we want to own the sewage pipes together. We want to own the information pipes together because we're getting the equivalent of cholera for our minds, for our attention. But whatever alternative business model we move to, the key thing to understand is all the incentives for social media then change. At the moment, all the incentives are finding out the weakness in your attention in order to hack it and invade it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you move to one of these different business models, that's not the incentive anymore. Suddenly, they don't want to hack and invade your attention to sell you to advertisers. Suddenly, they're like, oh, Candice is our customer now. What does Candice want? Oh, it turns out Candice wants to be able to pay attention. Let's design our app to heal her attention, not hack her attention. Oh, Candice wants to meet up with her friends offline. Let's insert a button that makes it much easier for her to do that, right? Because it turns out people feel better, as we all realized during COVID, when we look into each other's faces rather than when we stare at each other through screens. There's all sorts of, it's unbelievably easy to redesign Facebook and all the other apps to facilitate attention rather than destroy them. But you have to get the incentives right? And these companies are not going to do that on their own any more than the lead industry was one day going to go, you know what, guys, I think we've made enough money. Let's stop fucking up children's brains. Right? They're never going to do that. They had to be made to do it by a movement. In the same way, because at the moment we're in a race, right?
Mm-hmm.
Loads of the 12 factors that I talk about in Stolen Focus that are invading people's attention are on course to get worse, right? If we don't stop them. You know, Paul Graham, one of the biggest investors in Silicon Valley, said the world will be more addictive in the next 40 years than it was in the last 40. Think about how much more addictive TikTok is than Facebook, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But on the other side of this race, we've got to have a movement of all of us saying, no, you don't get to do this. No, this is not how we want to live. No, you don't get to invade our children's brains. No, you don't get to invade our brains. And it requires a shift in consciousness. We are not medieval peasants begging at the court of King Zuckerberg for a few little crumbs of attention from his table. We are the free citizens of democracies, and we own our own minds, and we can take them back, but we're going to have to fight for them.
I couldn't agree more. I would push back a little bit and say that I do think a lot of them are Bond villains because I do think a lot of it's intentional, and I think that you turned the human race into a product without our consent. So I
Yeah.
have a little bit more
Yeah,
animosity.
you're probably right. I think they become Bond villains at the point at which they know they're doing it and they don't stop, right? They didn't, at the start, they didn't,
Right.
it was not their intention to have these effects. I mean, it sort of was with Facebook, actually. So maybe I'm probably being too nice and generous about them, but it's not. But you find this even with like, you know, for one of my previous books, I interviewed like hitmen for the deadliest Mexican drug cartel who'd killed loads of people. And even people are rarely, I think it's evil things rarely stem from people being sort of deliberately wicked. Like it's generally they're pursuing some other goal that they think is good, and they end up doing something harmful. But I agree with you, the point at which they know they're doing it and they carry on doing it anyway, well, then they are villains, right? And then they are responsible for their actions. And then and they know they're doing it. We know because we got all this leaked information from Facebook now, thanks to the heroic work of Frances Haugen, who made the very brave decision to leak it. Yeah, they know what they're doing, right? They know very well what they're doing.